The Vanishing Bride. It was a calm morning in Baker Street when a letter arrived bearing the unmistakable seal of nobility. Holmes, still in his robe, turned it over once and raised an eyebrow. "Watson," he said, "it seems we've attracted the attention of Lord Robert Saint-Simon, the son of the Duke of Balmoral." I looked up from the newspaper. "The name is familiar." "It should be," Holmes replied. "He made the social columns yesterday." He handed me a folded clipping. "Yesterday, at St. George's Church, Hanover Square, the Honorable Robert St. Simon was united in marriage to Miss Hattie Doran of San Francisco. The bride, a young heiress of great beauty and spirit, is the daughter of the late Elias Doran, the Californian millionaire." "A noble bachelor weds an American heiress," I said. "A modern fairy tale." Holmes gave a tight smile. "Fairy tales don't come with personal letters and urgent appointments." At that very moment there was a knock. Mrs. Hudson entered, announcing, "Lord St. Simon, sir." The man who entered was tall, aristocratic, and visibly agitated. His clothes were flawless, his expression not. "I trust I may speak freely?" he asked. "Absolutely," Holmes replied. "Please begin." Lord St. Simon sat stiffly. "It concerns my marriage, or rather, its sudden undoing." He explained that his bride, Miss Hattie Doran, had seemed in good spirits that morning. The ceremony proceeded without issue. The wedding breakfast was elegant and well attended. "But then," he said, "she excused herself, saying she felt unwell. She left the room, and she never returned." Watson leaned forward. "She disappeared." "Vanished, without a word." Holmes steepled his fingers. "No note, no carriage, no sightings." "Nothing. She was seen walking alone in the Hyde Park direction. After that, silence." I glanced at Holmes, whose expression had gone still, focused. "There was," St. Simon added carefully, "another detail. Her bouquet was found floating in the Serpentine." The bride's last steps. For a moment, no one in the room spoke. Holmes finally broke the silence. "The bouquet in the Serpentine. Was that before or after anyone noticed her disappearance?" "After," said Lord St. Simon. "It was found by a constable along the water's edge. The flowers were floating loose, the ribbon still tied." Holmes's fingers tapped the armrest. "Interesting." "She didn't return to her hotel," continued the nobleman. "Her maid, Alice, confirmed she had not come back. Her traveling bag and belongings remained untouched." "And the guests at the wedding breakfast?" Holmes asked. "There were about 20 of us," said Lord St. Simon, "mostly friends of my family, a few American acquaintances of hers. Nothing unusual occurred, but I did notice something odd." He hesitated. "Shortly before she left the table there was a scene. A man entered, rugged, sunburnt, certainly not a gentleman. He passed near our table, caught Hattie's eye, and she turned pale, the wine glass in her hand spilled. Watson and I exchanged a glance. "Did she speak to him?" Holmes asked. "Not a word, but I saw something pass between them. An understanding, a shock. He left within moments." Holmes stood and moved to the fireplace. "Did anyone identify the man?" "No one knew him. One of her father's old business partners, perhaps. I've given the description to the police, but they've found nothing." Holmes turned back toward him. "Have you considered the possibility that your wife's disappearance was planned?" Lord St. Simon frowned. "You mean elopement? Or something near to it?" "But she had no reason," he snapped. "We were well matched. Her behavior had been impeccable. Until that moment." Holmes's voice was calm. "Emotions are not always logical, Lord St. Simon. And weddings, especially those between wealth and title, often conceal more than they reveal. Watson said, "What about her family in America? Any previous engagements?" St. Simon shook his head. "Her parents are dead. She came to England with her maid, and I handled most of the arrangements." Holmes returned to his chair. "Then I shall need to speak with this maid, Miss Alice." Lord St. Simon stood. "I shall send her to you immediately." As he left, Holmes muttered, "The serpentine is deep, but motives are deeper still." Alice's secret. It was not long after Lord St. Simon's departure that Miss Alice, the maid of Hattie Doran, arrived at Baker Street. She was a woman in her early 30s, modestly dressed, her face intelligent, and her eyes keen with a hint of resentment. Holmes welcomed her warmly. "Please sit, Miss Alice. We understand you've been close to Miss Doran throughout her time in England." "Yes, sir," she said, her voice firm. "I've been with her since she was 16. I knew her father, Mr. Elias Doran, and I came with her from San Francisco after he passed." "And what can you tell us about yesterday?" Holmes asked. Alice exhaled slowly. Something was wrong before the wedding even began. Miss Hattie was nervous, yes, but not like a bride, more like someone waiting for news, or someone afraid of it. "Did she say anything?" Watson asked. "She hardly spoke all morning. Pale as a ghost, but she smiled and went through the motions. Then, during the wedding breakfast, that man arrived." Holmes leaned forward. "Describe him." "Tall, dark hair, tanned skin, looked like he'd been working under the sun for years. He didn't speak, just stared. Miss Hattie went rigid. I thought she might faint." "Did you know him?" "No, sir, but she did." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And then—" "She left the table, whispered to me, 'Wait here.' I tried to follow, but she was gone by the time I reached the hall." "Did she take anything with her?" "No. Her clothes, money, even her hat box, still in her suite." Holmes asked, "Was Miss Doran ever engaged before coming to London?" Alice hesitated. "If she was, she never told me. But I know she wasn't the same person after we arrived here. She used to laugh, sing. She stopped doing both." Holmes stood and moved to the window. "Miss Alice," he said, "has your mistress ever spoken of someone she believed to be dead?" The maid looked startled. "Why, yes. Years ago, before her father passed, she used to wear a ring, said it belonged to someone she loved who died in the mines. She never gave details." Watson whispered, "And now that ghost walks into her wedding?" Holmes turned, eyes gleaming. "No, Watson. Ghosts don't throw shadows. But secrets do." Footprints in Hyde Park. The morning was bright but cool as Holmes and I set off on foot. His stride purposeful and eyes scanning every detail with almost unnatural precision. His destination? Hyde Park, the last place Hattie Doran had been seen, and where her bouquet had been recovered. "We must act quickly, Watson," Holmes said. "Time smudges footprints and memories alike." We arrived near the Serpentine, where a constable had reported finding the flowers. Holmes crouched, examining the gravel path, the reeds near the water's edge, and a faint depression in the grass. "Here," he murmured, brushing the ground with his gloved fingers. 2 sets of prints, one light and narrow, Hattie Doran's, the other larger, deeper, a man's. They walk together, side by side, then stop. Look, heel marks slightly turned inward. A pause. Watson leaned in. She turned to face him. Holmes nodded. "And dropped the bouquet." We followed the trail further. It veered off the main path and disappeared near a row of benches. Holmes stood quietly, then tapped a wooden railing beside the nearest bench. "A fresh scratch. Recent," he said. "And here, Mud. A carriage wheel. No horse droppings, which means it stood only briefly. A private hire, I asked. Likely, Holmes replied. A man waits here for a woman. She meets him, tosses her bouquet to cover her departure, then vanishes into the carriage. Holmes looked around one final time, then led us out of the park. We crossed town to a quiet street just beyond the edge of Mayfair, where he paused before a narrow mews entrance. I have a contact here, Holmes said. A groom who knows every livery in the city. A few words, a small coin, and 10 minutes later, Holmes returned. The description of the man and woman fit. The carriage was hired to go to a lodging house near Euston Station. And from there, Holmes's eyes narrowed. They left on foot, paid in full, no luggage, but the driver heard the man say, "We've got no time, the first train to Southampton." Watson straightened. Southampton? For America? Possibly, Holmes said, or somewhere near the sea. He smiled slightly. Let's pay a visit to that lodging house. The man from the mines. The lodging house near Euston Station was modest, a small, brick-fronted building with peeling paint and lace curtains drawn too tightly for the daylight outside. Holmes knocked twice. An older woman opened the door with suspicion in her eyes. Holmes produced a card. Sherlock Holmes. I'm inquiring about a tall gentleman and a young lady who rented a room here yesterday. Dark complexion, American accent, likely left early this morning. Her eyes narrowed, but the name carried weight. Aye, they were here, she said. Didn't give a name. Paid in sovereigns. Spoke in low voices, but polite. Left before dawn. Holmes asked, Did they mention where they were going? She shook her head. Only that they were catching up with lost time. I assumed it was newlyweds running off. Watson and I exchanged glances. Holmes asked one final question. Did the gentleman have a scar on his left cheek? The woman paused. Yes, now that you mention it, a thin white line. Holmes thanked her, and we stepped into the street. He turned to me. Watson, the man is Frank H. Moulton, former prospector. Declared dead after an Apache raid in Arizona 5 years ago. I blinked. How do you know? Hattie Doran's father was a wealthy mine owner. During his time in the West, his daughter fell in love with a foreman, Moulton. They were secretly married. He left on business, and when word came of his death, Hattie grieved, but carried on. Her father brought her to England to escape the memories. She believed she was widowed. And now he's back. Holmes nodded. He tracked her down, learned of the engagement to Lord St. Simon, and came to reclaim her. She saw him at the wedding breakfast and vanished before it was too late. Watson said quietly, and Lord St. Simon never knew. No, Holmes said, because to the world his bride simply vanished, but to Hattie she was merely returning to the man she never stopped loving. He sighed. A tragic twist, but not a crime. The nobleman's disgrace. It was early evening when Lord Robert St. Simon returned to 221B Baker Street. He entered with the same rigid posture, but his eyes betrayed unrest. Holmes rose to greet him. I trust you've discovered something? The nobleman asked impatiently. Holmes gestured to a chair. I've discovered everything, my lord, but I advise you, prepare yourself. The truth may sting. St. Simon frowned. Go on. Holmes began plainly. Your wife, Miss Hattie Doran, was already married before she met you. The nobleman leapt from his seat. Impossible. 5 years ago, Holmes continued, in California. Her husband, Frank Moulton, was believed dead in a frontier conflict. She mourned him, but he survived, tracked her down, and arrived on the morning of your wedding. Holmes's tone softened. She saw him. She realized he was alive. And rather than shame you publicly at the altar, she slipped away to avoid scandal. They left London together. St. Simon's face turned red. She married me. That is a matter of public record. Holmes nodded. Indeed. But under English law, a marriage is invalid if one party is already married. In the eyes of the law and morality, you were never truly wed. For a moment, silence settled. Then Lord St. Simon's voice dropped to a bitter murmur. I have been made a fool. Watson interjected gently. Would you rather she had stood and denounced you during the ceremony? Holmes added. Or disappeared without a word, leaving you with no explanation? The nobleman stood slowly. I see. The American girl had a heart, at least, though I wish she had chosen a quieter method of escape. Holmes allowed a thin smile. Hearts rarely act with diplomacy, my lord. Lord St. Simon adjusted his cuffs, composure slowly returning. I shall inform the press of a misunderstanding, he said, and that Lady Hattie has chosen to remain in America. That, I think, is preferable to scandal. As you wish, Holmes said. The nobleman tipped his hat. Good day, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. He left with his pride barely intact, but with the truth in hand. Watson turned to Holmes. You handled that kindly. Holmes replied, Even the proud deserve mercy. When they've lost something they never truly possessed,